Hello everyone, my name is Space Dirt, and after a bit of a hiatus, I am back with the next episode of How to Make a Language. Last time, we started on grammar by going through some morphosyntactic concepts, and then made some morphosyntactic profiles for each of our languages. This time, we're going to narrow the scope a little bit and talk about nouns and what they can express. But before we do, it's important to understand the concept of grammatical categories. I used this term a bit in the last episode, but we never explicitly went over what grammatical categories are. Grammatical categories refer to a set of distinct properties of a given word that are all part of a similar conceptual category. An example of this would be verb tense. You can have past, present, future, or any other more specific point in time. But all of these properties can be grouped into the category of tense because they encode the property of the time at which the verb occurred. Normally, these properties within the given grammatical category are mutually exclusive with one another, and can be thought of as taking up one slot within a word. For example, a noun can't be both singular and plural. Not all languages share the same grammatical categories, so some languages may care about categories that aren't important in other languages, and vice versa. The properties within a given grammatical category can also vary substantially between languages, and some languages make very, very fine distinctions. To illustrate this, let's take a look at our first nominal grammatical category, number. Grammatical number refers to the number or quantity of a specific noun. In English, this manifests as two distinct properties, singular and plural, where a singular noun refers to just one thing and a plural is more than one, be that 2 or 200. However, there are many other possibilities. Many languages also include a dual number, which indicates a pair of nouns. Rarer than this is the trial, which indicates 3 of something and is only attested in pronouns. Paucal is another rarer number, which indicates a smaller group of objects. Think of it as expressing a few of something. There's a whole host of different number distinctions to be made above the basic singular and plural. One thing to note here is that in all of the examples thus far, the singular has been the default or unmarked form, while all the other numbers are indicated by some sort of marking. But what if we had the opposite? This happens in some languages in certain sets of nouns, though crucially not all of them, and is called a singulative collective system, in contrast to the singular plural systems we're used to. Here, the default form of the noun indicates more than one, and it can be marked to signify just one of something. Nouns in this category are usually things found in groups, like a herd or flock of animals. As a final option, in many languages, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, as well as Australia, number marking just isn't that important and can be optional or absent entirely. For our example languages, let's keep it simple for language A and give it a simple singular-plural distinction. But let's get a little spicy for language B and give it a dual in addition to the singular and plural. Moving on to our next grammatical category, we have something that any speakers of Romance or Slavic or other European languages will likely be quite familiar with, gender, also called noun class. In languages with gender, nouns are grouped into particular categories called genders or classes, and crucially, the category of a given noun affects words that co-occur with the noun. That is, there is some sort of agreement. Just as a quick side note, although the terms noun class and gender are sometimes distinguished, with noun class often being used in systems with a large number of divisions, I will be using the terms interchangeably for the purposes of this video. Anyway, gender can manifest in a variety of ways. A masculine-feminine distinction is common in many European languages, and some go further and also have a neuter gender. Other languages have a distinction based on animacy, grouping animate and inanimate nouns into two distinct categories, sometimes with further subdivisions. Although those are the most common subtypes, other divisions also occur. Once you've got a system, though, the question is, how do you assign a gender to a given noun? In some languages, they go off semantic criteria, which makes the process rather simple, though in most languages with semantic systems, there are some nouns which don't fit into the expected gender, which in many cases can be chalked up to cultural perception of the noun. In other cases, it can be a product of etymology, like in German, where the word for girl is in the neuter rather than the feminine gender because it is a diminutive noun, and diminutive nouns in German are always neuter. However, the question still remains as to what to do with nouns that don't fit well into any particular gender. In some languages, there's a single everything else gender for nouns that don't fit well into any particular class. In other languages, these nouns are distributed among classes, sometimes still according to semantics, but also according to morphology or phonology, and the exact rules can range from simple to rather complex. In other cases, any sort of clue as to a noun's gender may have eroded away in the process of linguistic evolution, and so neither a noun's meaning nor form indicate the gender 100% of the time, and it must simply be memorized. In terms of number of classes, the most common systems tend to only have a couple class divisions, though many Bantu languages have around 10 distinct noun classes if one counts the singular and plural together. For our examples, let's leave noun class out of language A, but give language B a masculine, feminine, neuter gender system, and have gender assignment based mainly on semantic criteria, though we'll go through the exact process of gender assignment in a later video when we talk about making words. Next, there's grammatical case. We talked briefly about this last episode as how dependent marking surfaces, marking the dependent noun to signify any large number of things. Although I didn't talk about them explicitly in the last episode, I did have little notes explaining the uses of some of the cases. Going back over those, we had nominative, which serves to mark the subject, accusative, which marks the direct object, dative, which marks the indirect object, and genitive, which marks the possessor. However, as anyone that spent time on Wikipedia's list of grammatical cases article can tell you, there are many, many more possibilities. Some other common cases include the locative case, which marks location at or near the noun, the ablative case, which denotes movement away from something, and the instrumental case, which marks the instrument with which an action is carried out. Of course, these names only serve as a useful shorthand when identifying the main use of the case, and the full scope of what any given case can be used for depends on the language. For example, the ablative in Latin has a huge variety of uses besides the canonical motion away meaning. The number of cases in a given language can also vary quite considerably, with some like Persian having just 2, and others like Finnish having 15. Cases can also be thought of as a loose hierarchy, where if a language has one case, it usually also has all the cases lower on the hierarchy, though this is not a hard and fast rule. Taking a look back at our examples, since language A tends towards head rather than dependent marking, we can say that nouns aren't marked for case at all. For language B, we'll keep it simple with a nominative case and something called an oblique case. The oblique case is used as a sort of catch-all case that encompasses every situation in which the noun isn't functioning as a subject, and is a good option for a 2-case system. Our next category is that of definiteness, but to understand definiteness, we need to understand reference. If we take any noun, say dog, you can use the word dog to refer to any sort of domesticated canine. If we use it in a sentence, though, like my dog likes running through the snow, the word dog is referring to one specific animal. The quality of definiteness is basically the quality of being able to pick out this unique or specific referent given the context. In English, definiteness is conveyed through the use of articles, a and the. For example, if we say, I saw a dog yesterday, using an indefinite article, that would mean that you just saw some sort of dog. But if you instead said, I saw the dog yesterday, using a definite article, that would indicate that both you and the speaker are assumed to know the exact dog you're referring to. Many other languages use the same strategy with both a definite and indefinite article, but many also only have a definite article and others only an indefinite article. Articles aren't the only way to encode definiteness, however, and quite a few languages have special affixes that mark the noun as definite or indefinite. Finally, many languages just simply do not mark the distinction. For our example languages, let's give language A definite affix and leave definiteness out of language B just to keep things relatively simple. There are some other, less common categories as well. For example, at the start of this episode, we mentioned tense as a verbal category, but in some languages, it occurs on nouns as well. In Guarani, for example, nouns can take suffixes that indicate past and future. The nominal past tense indicates something like the word X, or more generally, the idea of someone or something that used to be something else. On the other hand, the nominal future means someone who is not yet something, but will become that thing in the future. They can even be combined to achieve a meaning like something that was going to be something at one point, but will no longer become that thing. For our examples, I'll leave this out, but I figured it was worth a mention since it can be very fun to play around with. Now, let's shift our discussion slightly to the realm of pronouns. Pronouns are words that can stand in for nouns and noun phrases and come in many different subtypes. Personal pronouns are probably the most familiar subtype, and are the one that we will be focusing on in this video. They include words like I and you. Pronouns often take different forms based on many of the grammatical categories that we've already covered, like number and gender, though the most crucial category when discussing personal pronouns is person. Person is what's called a deictic category, which means that they need some sort of context to understand their meaning. For example, if you saw the sentence, I ate potatoes in isolation, you'd have no idea who actually ate potatoes. But if you knew that the person that said that was me, Spacedirt, then you'd know what the I actually meant in that context, that being me. There are three main values of person: first, second, and third person, with first referring to the speaker, second referring to the addressee, and third referring to any outside entity that isn't one of those two. So then in English, we have I as first person, you as second, and it, he, and she as third. Pronouns can also express a variety of other categories. Sometimes they reflect formality in social context. Other times they reflect clusivity, that is, whether or not we refers to you and us, or just us. There is a whole host of pronominal fun out there, but one of the main reasons I'm bringing up pronouns in this episode is often other word classes are inflected pronominally in order to express various grammatical relations. When nouns are inflected like this, the indicated relationship is usually possessor and possessee, with the pronoun indicating person, number, or any other number of categories of the possessor. As a side note, possession as a full phenomenon is way beyond the scope of this particular video and will be covered in a future video. Anyway, as we briefly mentioned last episode, this is a form of head marking, so since language A is predominantly head marking, let's give it affixes that mark the person and number of the possessor. We'll go more into pronominal marking in the next video, but just as a final note, it's important to remember that not all of these categories are isolated from each other. They interact in a variety of ways that can give your language quite a bit of flavor. Perhaps gender distinctions are neutralized in the plural, or maybe case marking depends on definiteness. Figuring out exactly how the categories mesh is an important part of the conlanging process. And although we won't be going over all the interactions in detail this time, I wanted to bring it up since it is an important thing to keep in mind, and we will be going over it in more detail later down the line. Anyway, that should be all for this episode. We've looked at quite a few nominal categories, though by no means every single one, and fleshed out the morphosyntax of our conlangs even more. In the next episode, we'll dive into the wonderful complexities of verbs. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and this is Spacedirt, signing off.